No man had ever wanted the spinster orc who had worked on the farm for many years, but everything changed when a cowboy saw the orc calm the black stallion of the property, and the cruel boss turned it into a humiliating punishment. Either the horse would finally be truly ridden, or the cowboy and the orc would have to marry if they wanted to keep working on the farm. But to understand how we got here, we have to go back. 2 months before, when the black stallion first arrived and nobody knew yet what it would cost them. Harlan Veyr had spent 14 years learning how to disappear into work, not the cowardly kind of disappearing, not the kind that hid from trouble, the kind that settled into routine the way a nail settles into old wood, deep, quiet, permanent. He was 34 years old and had lived in the same small workers' cabin since he was 20, and most nights he did not mind that at all. The Thorn Ranch stretched wide across the flats west of the Iron Canyon, bordered by a dark tree line to the north and a dry creek bed to the south that only ran with water when the rains decided to remember it. The land was brown and vast and indifferent, the way frontier land tends to be. But Harlan understood it. He understood the cattle, the fences, the horses, especially the horses. That understanding had earned him a reputation among the ranch hands that most men spent their whole careers chasing. Reliable, good with the animals, hard to rattle. Garrick Thorn, the man who owned every fence post and every blade of dry grass for 3 miles in any direction, valued those qualities the way a miser values coin, not because he cared about the person who held them, but because they were useful. Thorn was a heavy man with a thin mouth and the eyes of someone who had never forgiven the world for being difficult. He ran his ranch with the kind of efficiency that looked like order from a distance and felt like cruelty up close. Harlan had made peace with Thorn a long time ago, not a real peace, more like a treaty between 2 parties who understood each other's limits. Harlan worked hard, Thorn paid him, neither asked too much of the other. It was the kind of arrangement that lasted as long as nobody needed anything unusual. The trouble had begun 3 months before, with a horse. The black stallion arrived in late summer, purchased from a dealer 2 territories east, who had offered no explanation for why the animal was so cheap. Harlan had seen the horse step off the transport wagon and understood immediately. The stallion was enormous, 17 hands at least, coal black from nose to tail, with legs like carved timber and eyes that held something hard and feverish that went beyond simple fear. The other horses pressed themselves against the far side of the paddock when he was brought in. The ranch dogs would not go near the fence. Garrick Thorn had seen size and beauty and imagined profit. Harlan had seen the white showing at the rim of those dark eyes and felt a cold settling in his stomach. Within the first week, the stallion had broken 2 fence rails, kicked a hole in the stable wall, and put a ranch hand named Clive on his back in the mud with 3 bruised ribs. Thorn had not seemed particularly troubled. He simply told Harlan the horse needed breaking, as if it were a simple thing, as if the stallion were merely impolite. Harlan had tried. He was genuinely good with horses, not by the loose standards of men who confuse dominance with skill. He knew how to speak softly near a frightened animal. He knew how to let a horse learn the smell of a man before anything else. But the stallion refused every approach with a fury that did not feel entirely natural. It was as if the horse had been taught, through repetition and pain, that every human hand existed only to hurt. The other cowboys had tried too, one by one, then given up. By October, most of them would not enter the corral when the stallion was loose. They would stand at the fence and watch the horse circle and circle with that awful, relentless energy, and they would say it was cursed or broken in ways that could not be fixed, or they would simply walk away and say nothing. Harlan had not given up, but he was starting to understand what that word meant. The morning Garrick Thorn delivered his ultimatum, the sky above the ranch was the color of old iron, and the wind had teeth. Winter was 3 weeks away by the feel of it, maybe less. The creek bed had already dried to dust, and at night the temperature dropped fast enough to make a man feel the cold as a personal threat. Thorn called Harlan to the main house after breakfast. He was seated at the head of a long table with a cup of black coffee he hadn't touched, and a ledger open in front of him he wasn't reading. He looked at Harlan the way men like Thorn often looked at their workers. Not unkind exactly, but entirely without warmth. The way a man looks at a piece of equipment he is deciding whether to repair or replace. "The horse," Thorn said. Not a question, not an explanation, just the subject. "I'm still working on it," Harlan said. "You've been working on it for 3 months. Some horses take... I didn't pay good coin for a horse that can't be ridden." Thorn closed the ledger. "Before the first hard freeze, that's the deadline. You get him saddle broke before the cold comes in, or you find somewhere else to be." Harlan stood very still. He had been expecting this, or something close to it. Expecting it did not make it easier. 14 years, he said, not as a complaint, just a fact he wanted to put on the table. "And every one of them well compensated." Thorn picked up his coffee. "Before the freeze, Harlan." 3 days later, Harlan made another attempt in the main corral, and this time Thorn made it known that the other hands should watch. Cal Draven was there, a lean, mean-mouthed cowboy of 28, who had been on the ranch 2 years, and who had spent most of those 2 years finding ways to remind Harlan that being good at something for a long time did not make you immune to failing. Pete Alger was there, and old Russ, who mostly just laughed at everything, and 4 or 5 others who leaned against the fence with their arms crossed and expressions that tried to look neutral and mostly landed on eager. The Stallion was in the far corner when Harlan entered. The horse turned immediately, not curious, not alert in the way of a horse noticing a new presence, alert in the way of something that had learned that a new presence usually meant pain. The ears flattened, the neck bowed in that particular downward arc that experienced horsemen recognized as the shape of a decision being made. Harlan moved slowly. He kept his voice low and his hands visible and his posture as soft as he could make it. The Stallion let him get within 10 feet before the animal's whole body tightened like a rope going taut. 8 feet. 7. Then the horse exploded sideways with a sound that was less a whinny than a scream. And Harlan went up and then down, and then the mud was in his mouth, and the world was tilted and very loud. The men at the fence made sounds. Some of them were concern. Most were not. The Stallion circled the corral with its tail raised and mud spraying from its hooves. Harlan pulled himself upright and spit mud and stood still, breathing. He was not hurt, but he understood, with the particular clarity that humiliation sometimes delivers, that he was running out of time and ideas both. He was staring at the ground when he noticed the Stallion stop. Not slow down, stop, completely. As if someone had cut the string that was pulling it. Harlan looked up. She was standing at the fence near the eastern post, holding a wooden bucket of water in both hands, and she was simply watching. Not with the hungry interest of the other ranch hands, not with the particular attention people give to other people's failures because it makes their own feel smaller. She was watching the horse. Thalara was the tallest person on the Thorn Ranch, and possibly the tallest woman Harlan had ever seen. She stood 6'2" in flat boots, built on a different scale than the people around her. Not heavy, not soft, but proportioned with a kind of density that made you recalibrate your sense of a room whenever she walked into it. Her skin was the dark, muted green of a forest in winter. Her face, when you looked at it without whatever story you had already told yourself about orc women, was strong and even-featured, with wide-set amber eyes and a jaw that suggested someone who had learned early not to show weakness through expression. She had no tusks, no fangs, just a firm mouth and those watching eyes. Her hair was dark and unruly in the way of someone who worked too hard and slept too little to give it much thought. She was wearing what she always wore, rough linen, heavy canvas, boots that had been resoled twice. She was 31 years old and had been on the ranch since she was 19. In all that time, she had washed laundry, mended clothes, helped in the kitchen, tended the smaller animals, and generally done whatever work was placed in front of her, without complaint and without drawing attention to herself. The ranch hands knew her the way they knew the water pump and the hayloft. She was there, she worked, and they did not think about her much beyond that, except to make certain kinds of jokes, the kind that travelled in low voices and were not meant to reach her, but always did. Spinster Orc, too tall, too green. Not the kind of woman any man in this territory would ever want. She had heard all of it. She had learned to hear it the way you learn to hear wind, constant, meaningless, something to be waited out. At that moment, standing at the fence with her bucket and her calm amber eyes, she was looking at the stallion the way very few people look at an animal, not trying to read it, not trying to manage it, just seeing it. The stallion had gone completely still in the middle of the corral, its great dark head turned toward her, its ears at an angle that was not quite flat, not quite forward, somewhere between fear and attention. The gathered men had gone quiet. They didn't understand what they were seeing exactly, but they understood that something had changed. Harlan understood it too. Something shifted in his thinking, a small, quiet shift, like a door opening a crack on a dark room to let in a thin line of light. Not revelation, not yet. Just the beginning of a question. Then Cal Draven said something from the fence, something with a laugh in it, and the moment broke. The stallion's ears flattened and it moved away to the far side of the corral. Thalara turned and walked back toward the laundry shed without looking at anyone, carrying her bucket, her face as still as it always was. Harlan climbed out of the corral. Nobody offered him a hand. That night, after supper, after the lamps had been trimmed and the yard gone dark, Harlan carried his own lamp to the fence line near the stallion's paddock and stood there in the cold. The stallion was moving in its slow, restless circles at the far side of the enclosure. It did this every night, circling as if trying to walk out from under something that rode on its back, even when no one was there. Then, from somewhere to his left, a sound came, low, very low. Not quite a song and not quite speaking, something between with the cadence of a slow stream over stones. He could not make out words. He was not sure there were words. Just a voice moving in the dark, patient and unhurried, with a quality he did not have a name for, the quality of someone speaking to another living thing as if it mattered, as if it deserved to be addressed. The stallion slowed. Its circling became smaller. Then it stopped entirely, and it stood in the center of the paddock with its head lowered, and its breathing changed from short and harsh to something longer, and the tension in those enormous dark muscles eased, like a fist slowly opening. Harlan turned toward the sound. Thalara was standing near the water trough on the far side of the fence, 10 feet away, not looking at him. She wasn't touching the fence. She wasn't reaching out. She was just there, the way a hearth is there, present and warm without demand. He watched her for a long moment. The stallion's head was still low, one ear tilted toward her voice. "How long have you been doing that?" he asked, keeping his voice as low as hers. She glanced at him, not startled. He suspected Thalara was not easily startled. "A while," she said. "Does it help?" She considered this without hurry, without performance. "It helps him," she said. "Whether it fixes anything, that's different." Harlan looked back at the stallion, standing still in the dark with its head down. "What are you saying to him?" "That nobody's coming to hurt him right now," she said. "That he can stop for a while." He didn't say anything after that, neither did she. They stood at the fence in the cold, and the stallion stayed still. And the night was quiet in a way that felt different from how it had felt before. In the days that followed, Harlan began to pay attention in a different way, not only to the stallion, to her, to the way she moved through the ranch like someone who had learned very precisely how much space she was allowed to occupy. To the way she answered questions with the minimum number of words, not from coldness, but from long practice at being someone whose longer answers tended to go unheard. To the way she ate alone, worked alone, sat alone, not as if she preferred it, but as if preference had stopped being relevant a long time ago. He found reasons to be near the stables when she was there. Tack that needed adjusting. Fence posts that probably didn't need looking at, but were close enough to the laundry line that he could hear her if she spoke. He told himself it was about the stallion. That was partially true, but not entirely. She noticed. He was certain of that. Thalara noticed most things. She simply continued whatever she was doing, and occasionally answered the questions he invented as pretexts. And occasionally she offered observations he hadn't asked for, that turned out to be more useful than anything he'd figured out on his own. "You keep going in with your shoulders up," she told him one afternoon, while folding dried shirts near the stable fence. She didn't look up when she said it. "Like you're ready for a fight." "I'm being careful," he said. He doesn't know the difference between careful and ready to fight. He only knows what your body says, and your body says you're expecting him to attack. She set a folded shirt aside, "which means you're already telling him something's wrong before you open the gate." Harlan tried this the next day. It felt foolish, trying to relax his shoulders, trying to change the language of a body that had learned its posture over 34 years. But the stallion did not explode when he entered. It moved away from him, kept its distance, watched him with that hard, wary gaze, but it did not scream and it did not charge. Not progress you could measure, but something. He told Thalara that evening. She was quiet a moment then. Animals that were hurt badly enough don't attack because they're angry. They attack because they're terrified, and they think attacking is the only thing that works. The trick isn't convincing them you're not dangerous. It's convincing them that being calm is safe, that it won't cost them anything. He looked at her while she spoke. She was looking at the stallion, one ear turned toward them. And Harlan had the distinct and uncomfortable feeling that she was not speaking only about the horse. The way the words fit too evenly. The way she said they when another person might have said it. "Thalara," he said. "The water bucket needs refilling before dark," she said, and walked away. October became November the way seasons change on the frontier, not gradually but all at once, like a door slamming. The temperature dropped overnight, the creek bed cracked, and the mornings arrived grey and sharp-edged. Thorn had said before the first hard freeze, and the first hard freeze was now a matter of days. Thorn had also arranged a demonstration. He had invited 3 buyers from neighbouring ranches and 2 men from the trading post at Redwall Crossing, telling them all to come and watch the stallion get properly ridden for the first time. He had not asked Harlan if this was wise. He had simply announced it. Harlan had heard about it from Cal Draven, who delivered the news with the kind of smile that wanted a reaction and was designed not to look like it did. The morning of the demonstration, Harlan was at the stable before sunrise. The previous week had produced genuine progress, real progress, not the kind you talked yourself into. The horse would stand near him now without full-body tension. It would eat from a bucket while Harlan was in the enclosure. These were not small things. In the specific language of difficult horses, they were enormous things. But they were not the same as being publicly ridden before a crowd of strangers on a cold November morning, with buyers watching and Cal Draven grinning from wherever Cal Draven decided to stand. Thalara found him at the stable gate before the others arrived. She handed him a tin cup of something hot without being asked and stood beside him looking at the stallion in the early light. "Don't do it today," she said. "I don't have a choice. You'll undo everything you've built." Her voice was quiet and certain, stating a fact rather than offering an opinion. "He's not ready for a crowd. He's barely ready for you alone. Thorn will throw me out if I refuse." She was quiet. They both knew that was true. "Then don't use the saddle," she said finally. "Don't force it. Just go in and stand near him. Let the crowd see that he's calm with you. Let that be enough. Only Thorn wants to see him ridden. Thorn wants to sell something impressive to those buyers. Give him something impressive, just not what he asked for." It was the kind of advice that sounded simple and was not. Harlan drank the hot liquid, bark tea, slightly bitter, and stared at the stallion, who was watching them both from the middle of the paddock with his large dark eyes. An hour later, the buyers arrived. Thorn came out from the main house in his good coat. Caldraven and the other hands gathered at the fence, and Harlan opened the corral gate and went in. It went badly from the first moment. The crowd noise was the problem. He had known it would be, and had thought he was ready for that knowledge, and he was not. 3 buyers talking near the fence, Thorn's voice carrying across the yard as he explained the animal's value. Caldraven's laugh at something someone said, the particular way that many voices together carry a quality of agitation even when no one means it. The stallion felt all of it before Harlan was 2 steps inside the gate. The horse went rigid, ears flat, tail up. Harlan kept his posture soft, kept his voice low, took small steps, said the same things he'd been saying for weeks. The phrases the horse had begun to associate with stillness and safety. For a few seconds, it seemed like it might work. The stallion was watching him with something that was almost recognition. Almost the faint memory of those quiet evenings at the fence, the low voice, the patient presence. Then one of the buyers dropped something metallic on the fence rail. A belt buckle, a flask, something small and accidental, to a horse that had been beaten enough that every unexpected sound was the sound of what came before pain. It was everything. The stallion went up. Harlan was not even mounted. No saddle on the horse. He hadn't gotten that far. But the stallion's movement was so sudden and so large that the shockwave of displaced air and mud hit him sideways and put him on the ground. He rolled, came up breathing hard, covered in cold mud, and stood very still, while the stallion screamed and circled, and the crowd made the sounds of people watching something they had been hoping would go wrong. Garrick Thorne's voice came over everything. "Get out of the damn corral, Harlan!" Harlan got out. He climbed the fence rather than open the gate, because opening the gate meant turning his back on the stallion. And the stallion was not in a state where turning your back was wise. He dropped down on the outside and stood with his hands at his sides, and the buyers were already moving away from the fence and talking among themselves. And the deal Thorn had been expecting to close today was dissolving visibly in real time. Thorn walked over. His face was the color of old brick. 14 years, Harlan said. He did not know why he said it again. It had worked no better the first time. 14 years of what? Thorn said, low and furious. 14 years of making me look like a fool in front of buyers? I had him making progress. You put a crowd on it. I own that horse, and I own this fence, and I own every working day you've spent here, and right now all of it is costing me money. Thorn turned. You're done. Take your things. Maybe he should marry the orc and take her with him. The Caldraven's voice, light and easy, the way a cruelty is light and easy when the person delivering it has nothing to lose. A few men laughed. The buyers looked away in the carefully neutral manner of people who did not want to get involved. Thalara was standing 30 feet off, near the laundry shed wall. She had come out for the demonstration like everyone else. She stood very still with her arms at her sides and her face entirely empty of expression, the practiced stillness of someone who had learned long ago that showing reaction only invited more of what caused it. But her eyes were very bright, and her jaw was very set. Garrick Thorne looked at Caldraven, then he looked at Thalara, and then, in the way that men like Thorne have of turning other people's pain into their own utility, his expression changed. Cruelty became calculation. Actually, Thorne said slowly, that gives me an idea. The terms were announced publicly, in front of everyone who remained in the yard. Thorn laid it out with detached precision. Either the Stallion would be properly broken and demonstrated before winter's end, or Harlan Veyr and Thalara would be removed from the property before the first snow. And if they wanted to stay, both of them, they would marry first. That was the condition, that was all. He said it like it was practical, like the kind of arrangement the frontier produced all the time, and nobody had reason to argue with. Maybe he even believed that. Men like Thorn often told themselves that cruelty was simply pragmatism. No one said anything. Caldraven was quiet for once. The ranch hands looked at their boots. The buyers had found something important to inspect on the far side of their horses. Thalara did not look at anyone. Her face was still and empty, and her hands were still and open at her sides, and she turned and walked back into the laundry shed and closed the door behind her without a word. Harlan stood in the mud and the cold and looked at the closed door. Then he looked at Garrick Thorn, already walking back toward the main house. Done with the conversation, then at the Stallion, still circling in the corral, still certain the world was made of threats. He knocked on the laundry shed door that evening. She did not answer immediately. He waited. Eventually the door opened just far enough for her to look at him, without committing to the conversation. "I had nothing to do with it," he said. "I know," she said. "Thorn shouldn't have. I know that too." Her voice was flat. Not angry, just depleted in the way of someone who has spent their entire life having things done to them by people who believed they had the right. "What do you want, Harlan?" He had been working out what to say on the walk over, and found now that he was here that none of it was adequate. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to understand that the answer is yours to give, and I'll take it as it comes." She waited. "I don't have anywhere else to go," he said. "Neither do you, not with winter coming." He let that sit for a moment. "I'm not asking you to do anything except survive the season on this property. I'm asking if you'll let me treat you decently while you do it." Thalara was quiet for a very long time. The cold was working on both of them, finding the gaps in collars and cuffs. The wind moved through the yard, and the lamp above the stable door swung on its hook, throwing light in long arcs across the mud. "That's a small thing to offer someone," she said finally. "I know it is," he said. "It's what I've got." She looked at him for a moment longer, long enough that he had the uncomfortable sense of being assessed with some care, measured against a standard he couldn't see. Then she opened the door the rest of the way. "Come in out of the cold," she said. "I'll make tea." The wedding was quiet. The ranch preacher said the words, and Harlan and Thalara said the words back, and nobody cheered and nobody cried, and it was done in less time than it took to shoe a horse. They moved Thalara's few things into Harlan's cabin that same afternoon. 2 changes of clothes, a worn blanket, a small, carved figure she set on the windowsill without explanation. He cleaned out the second shelf for her things. He asked if she needed anything else. She said no. They ate supper in what should have been an uncomfortable silence, and was instead, strangely, simply a quiet one. He kept his word. He treated her decently. He said good morning in the mornings. He did not take more than his half of the bed. He did not ask questions she had not invited. When she was working outside in the cold, he sometimes brought her tea without asking first, and she sometimes accepted it without thanking him, which they both understood as its own kind of gratitude. The Stallion, meanwhile, changed, with Thalara spending more time at the paddock openly now, not just in the evenings. The horse began to do something Harlan had nearly stopped expecting. It began to trust. Slowly, incrementally, the way anything deeply injured learns to trust, with enormous caution, with frequent reversals, with the constant testing of whether the thing you were beginning to believe in would prove itself to be another lie. But the direction was consistent, toward calm, toward her, and gradually, in her wake, toward Harlan too. One afternoon in the 4th week after the wedding, Thalara led the stallion by a loose rope around the paddock, and the horse walked beside her as if he had been doing it his whole life. Harlan watched from the fence and said nothing, because there was nothing adequate to say. The horse that had put men in the mud and been called cursed by every cowboy on the property was walking calmly beside an orc woman who spoke to it in a voice Harlan still could not quite hear, even when he was standing close. Later that same week, she showed him something she had found while checking the horse's legs. Old wounds, the kind that came from ropes pulled too tight or hobbles left on too long, or the deliberate application of something blunt to a place that would not show from a distance. The marks formed a kind of history, a record of systematic cruelty over a long period of time. "Garrick," Harlan said, not a question, "before you were brought in to deal with it, I think he wanted the horse broken in a specific way. The way that looks like obedience, but is actually terror. He didn't want a horse that trusted people." She ran her hand along the stallion's flank, and the horse stood still and let her. He wanted a horse that had given up. Harlan was quiet for a long moment. He was looking at the horse, at the marks under the new coat, at the way the animal stood differently now, with its weight more evenly distributed, its breathing easier. At the way it watched him from beneath that heavy, dark forelock, without the white showing at the edge of its eyes. "He won't get that," Harlan said. "No," she said, "he won't." The night Garrick Thorne told them the horse was to be sold, or put down if a buyer could not be found quickly enough, Harlan and Thalara sat at the small table in the cabin for a long time after supper, without speaking. The wind was working at the door, and the lamp was low, and the small carved figure on the windowsill cast a long shadow. "I've been saving," Harlan said eventually. She looked at him. "For a long time, 14 years on this property, and I never spent much. There's a piece of land east of Redwall Crossing that I had a look at 2 years ago. Not big. Cabin needs work, but it's mine, or it can be, for what I've saved." Thalara was very still. He had learned to read the difference between her stillness that was self-protection and the stillness that was thought. This was thought. "The horse comes with us," she said. "Obviously," he said. She looked at him a moment longer, then she began, efficiently and without drama, to tell him what she would need, packed, and what she would not take, and how long it would take her to be ready. It was, Harlan thought, one of the most beautiful conversations he had ever been part of. They left 2 nights later, before first light. No noise, no announcement. Harlan saddled his own horse and packed what mattered into 2 canvas bags. Thalara guided the stallion from the paddock with a hand near his neck and a voice like slow water, and the horse came with her through the dark gate and into the yard and down the frozen road, as if he had known this night was coming for a while and was simply glad it had finally arrived. The ranch lights were dark behind them. The road east was very long and very cold. Ahead, somewhere beyond the tree line and the dark hills, the land that belonged to Harlan Veyr waited with its broken cabin and its silent fields, not knowing yet what was coming toward it. The journey took 4 days through country that was not kind. They crossed 2 shallow rivers cold enough to make the horses gasp, and low mountain passes where the wind was a physical thing that pushed without interest in whether you wanted to be pushed. They slept in the open the first night, under canvas, close to each other for warmth in a way that neither acknowledged in the morning. The stallion stayed calm throughout. No circling, no screaming, no tension. Just a horse moving through wild country with the people it had decided to trust, ears alert, eyes clear. Thalara did not say much on the road. He had learned enough by now to know that her silence was not absence. She was watching everything, the birds, the tree line, the way the stallion's ears moved. Occasionally she would say something quiet, "There's a creek ahead, he can smell it," or "We'll want to camp before that ridge, the wind changes there at night." She was right every time, and Harlan did not question it, and the shape of his respect for her kept getting larger in ways that had nothing to do with admiration and everything to do with recognition. The recognition of a person of genuine competence in the world. On the third evening, sitting by a small fire while the horses stood nearby in the dark, she told him about the first years on the Thorn Ranch. She told it quietly and without asking for anything in return. The girl who had arrived at 19 without other options. The work that had kept her fed and housed. The decade plus of being invisible. The jokes she had learned not to hear. When she finished, he said, "You deserved better than that." "I know," she said. "I just stopped expecting it." "You shouldn't have to stop expecting it," he said. She looked at him then, a long, clear look with those amber eyes that missed very little. "No," she agreed softly. "I shouldn't." The fire burned low, and the stallion moved in the dark, and the frontier night was wide and cold and full of stars. And the two of them sat beside each other in the way of people who have begun, without ceremony or announcement, to build a life together. The cabin was everything Harlan had described, and nothing more. Small, drafty, with a door that hung wrong on its hinges, and a roof that had developed opinions about where rain belonged. The land was overgrown in places, and exhausted in others, and needed two people willing to work without being told to. They were both that kind of person. The first months were hard work and little else. They patched the roof, rehung the door, cleared enough land for spring planting, fixed the eastern fence line, built the stallion a proper shelter, spacious, dry, with clean straw, and access to the small pasture where the grass, when spring came, would be good grass. The work had a different quality than the work on Thorn's ranch. On Thorn's ranch, work was something done under the shadow of doing it wrong. Here, work was simply what needed doing, and they did it. And at the end of the day, they were tired in a clean way that felt earned rather than extracted. They began to talk in the evenings, first about the practical things, then about other things. She had opinions about the eastern pasture soil that turned out to be correct. He had opinions about the best way to fix a stone wall that turned out to be less correct, and she told him so, and they fixed it her way, and it held. She laughed for the first time one night when he dropped an entire pot of beans trying to prove he could carry it one-handed, and the laugh was quiet and surprised, as if it had escaped without permission, and it was the best sound he had heard in years. He stored it carefully, the way you store something rare. The stallion ran free in the spring. That was the right word for it, free, because the stallion on the Thorn Ranch had never in its life run without panic driving it. The first time it crossed the eastern pasture at full gallop, with its neck out and its mane streaming and no fear in its body, Thalara and Harlan both stood at the fence and watched without speaking. The horse ran to the far end of the pasture and came back, not because it had to, but because it wanted to. Because this was its place now. Because nobody here was going to hurt it. The seasons turned. The garden produced more than they expected the first year, and more than that the second. 2 more horses came to join them. Good horses, calm horses, bought cheaply from a widow who was leaving the territory. Thalara gentled both of them in under a month. Word got around, the way word does in frontier country, and occasionally a rancher would come by with a difficult animal and leave with a calmer one, and leave something in payment that helped the small property grow slowly into something real. Harlan learned her tells, the way her left eyebrow went up a fraction when she was amused but didn't want to show it, the way she hummed to herself, very low, when she was content, the same sound, more or less, that she used with the horses, and he wasn't entirely sure she knew she was doing it. The way she would sometimes sit on the porch steps in the evening and watch the land with an expression he couldn't quite read for a long time, until one night he asked her what she was looking at. "Nothing," she said. "That's the point." He understood. She learned his tells too, The way he pushed his hat back when something was bothering him. The way he went quiet when he was actually fine, but would not say so. The way he could fix almost anything mechanical, but would not ask for help, even when it would have been faster. She did not comment on most of these things. She simply, occasionally, handed him the tool he needed before he asked for it, or brought tea when he had been at something frustrating for too long, or sat near him when he was quiet, not trying to fix it, just being there the way she had learned to be there with the horses, and with the same effect. Things became calmer. 2 years after the night they left the Thorn Ranch, the property looked nothing like the broken place Harlan had purchased. The cabin had a new door and a sound roof and a second room they had built together the previous summer. The pastures were fenced and productive. The old cellar had been cleared out and stocked for winter in a way that suggested serious confidence about surviving it. There were chickens and 2 pigs and the 3 horses and a kitchen garden that Thalara had expanded 3 times because she turned out to have a profound and unexpected gift for growing things. There was also a cradle in the new room. It was small. Harlan had made it himself, badly at first, and then better after Thalara showed him what he was doing wrong with the jointing. The carving on the headboard was not fine work, but it was careful work, made with attention, and it held steady. She had lined it with a blanket from her own small supply of things, soft and worn from years of use, and it smelled of cedar and something clean. On an evening in late spring, with the light going amber across the pasture and the mountains in the east, catching the last of the sun, Thalara stood on the porch of the cabin holding their child. The baby was 2 months old, and had her eyes, that particular amber, watchful and clear, and Harlan's tendency to observe everything before committing to an expression. She was warm and solid and entirely unbothered by the world, which both her parents considered a promising start. Thalara was laughing, not the quiet, escaped laugh she had surprised herself with over the beans 2 years ago. A real laugh, full and unhurried, head back slightly, the way a person laughs when they are entirely certain there is nothing that needs to be defended against right now. The stallion had done something in the far pasture, a particular small piece of horse foolishness involving a startled bird and an overcorrection, and she had watched it and laughed, and the laugh was still going, warm and loose, on the porch. The stallion had recovered its dignity and was now moving across the eastern pasture at an easy canter, coming back toward the fence the way he always did in the evenings. And then something took him, some particular current of spring air, some private horse joy, and he opened up into a full run, thundering across the green field with his black coat, catching the low light, mane and tail streaming behind him. And Harlan, who had gone out earlier to check the eastern fence line and was coming back across the pasture on his own horse, saw the stallion come and did something that surprised even himself. He let his horse run too. He had not done this in years, just run, without destination or reason, fast and loud across open ground. But the spring evening had a quality to it that made destination and reason feel beside the point. And so he ran, leaning forward in the saddle, his hat going back in the wind, and he opened his mouth, and what came out was not a careful thing or a practiced thing. It was a sound straight from the gut, raw and joyful and completely undignified. Yee-haw! His voice carrying across the field, across the fence, up to the porch where Thalara stood with their child, and laughed harder at the sight of him. This man, who had spent 14 years being quiet and careful and contained, now riding at full gallop across his own land with his hat in his hand, shouting at the sky. The baby looked at the pasture. The stallion ran. The mountains held the last of the light. And on the porch, Thalara laughed and held her child and watched the man she had not expected come riding toward her out of the golden field, free at last. Both of them free, all 3 of them, in a place that was entirely and irrevocably theirs. Did you enjoy the story? Subscribe to the channel to watch more stories like this one. Leave a like, it helps the channel a lot. and drop a comment down below. I always read them and use your feedback to make our content better. Thanks so much. Orcbound Legacy.